Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we are going to be discussing the fascinating familial case of the Ghosthouse UFO. So, my mom actually just discussed this account, and if you haven't seen it, definitely go back and watch not just the second takeover video that she did for my channel, but also the first one, even though she talks about the case in the second one. So, if you're really interested to hear her account of it, go back and watch that. Because a few things to say about this. Hearing her talk about it really reminded me of the fact that, yes, I have this interest in the paranormal. And in a weird way, I've always viewed it as completely separate from the fact that I've had my own handful of paranormal experiences in my life. And beyond that, that my mom's side of the family has more than a handful of paranormal experiences throughout their shared kind of familial history. And it's really weird because I've definitely always kind of looked at the two things as separate. And finally, I think it took a podcaster asking me, does that have anything to do with your interests? That made me think, maybe it does. Probably does on some level that, I didn't even realize. And in addition to that, the way that I've handled hearing these stories since I've been growing up, in a weird way, I've just sort of filed them away as other paranormal accounts. And that being said, I think it's high time that I start kind of going through this, file of really weird accounts that I've encountered personally from people in my family or even accounts that I have that I've experienced. So effectively, I'm handling this case as though it were any other case. I'm going to go through and kind of dissect it like I like to do, give the account, and see if there are any threads to other types of paranormal phenomena or other encounters. Now, another thing I wanted to bring up, again, in looking over the video that my mom made, is that the account that she gave, and this is kind of a cautionary tale as to why you really want to get your separate accounts from separate witnesses as soon as possible, even though for me this was, several decades removed from when I could have interviewed them fresh off of the case. But still, you want to get as separate of an account as you can if there are multiple witnesses in a case, because um, I grew up hearing my mom's side of the story. So, the facts that she told are ingrained in my memory. And it was a long time afterwards that I was able to talk to my aunt about it, mainly because my aunt was very affected by what happened in this encounter and didn't really like to talk about it. So it was some years later when I was getting very involved in the field of ufology that I effectively interviewed my aunt and got her side of the account. Now, because of that, I've talked about both of their sides of this particular encounter to my mom many times. And so the account that she gave was kind of a blend of both sides of the account. So here I'm going to be using the notes that I took from talking to my mom about it, and when I was really interested in the UFO side of the paranormal and getting her account, and then going and talking to my aunt about it and getting her, information in those notes to sort of correlate them into one cohesive narrative while also giving both very clearly defined sides. So again, a big thank you, big shout out to my mom for doing those videos, not least of which is because you guys are getting to hear the inside scoop on the Ghost House UFO. So this encounter occurred when my mom was 12, so this would have been in 70, let me do my math here, 78. Or actually may have been 79, considering her birthday's in the end of the year. So anyway, late 70s. My mom was 12 years old, and her sister, my aunt in this story, was in her early 20s. And this occurred in the fantastic small town of Platteville, Wisconsin. Huge shout out to Platteville. My grandma still lives there. I've spent a lot of time growing up in that area. Fantastic area, lots of great folklore. Now, for some background, and my mom mentioned this as well in her previous video, the house where my mom grew up was, for all intents and purposes, you might call it a haunted house. Lots of strange events happened there. Might get more into that in another video. Now, on this particular evening in the late 70s, my mom was in the living room watching TV when she noticed a light outside and she thought that it was the full moon. So she went to go take a look out the window and saw that it couldn't be the moon because the actual moon was off in a different direction in the sky. And this quote unquote moon appeared to be moving closer or getting bigger. Now, at some point through watching this object, she was joined her sister, and together they watched the moon as, in my mom's recollection, mist obscured it and it vanished. Now, when I spoke to my aunt about this, she remembered being in the room which was affectionately called the ghost room. And the reason it was called the ghost room is because anyone who slept in there had bizarre experiences, such as the bed shaking so hard that it woke them up. There was a child that slept in that room who claimed that a woman came in and looked at him repeatedly when he tried to go to sleep in that room. So, again, lots of weird stuff happening in that room. So, at that time, it was my aunt's bedroom. So, she recalled looking out the window and seeing, again, this object which was about the moon's, brightness and size, which appeared to get bigger. Now, she also remembered suddenly being next to my mom, and in her recollection, they were still watching it when they both decided just to go to bed. Now, again, trying to piece together kind of a cohesive narrative from this, what we really have is that my aunt was upstairs on the second floor in the quote unquote ghost room, which was right above the living room where my mom was watching TV. Their attention is both attracted around the same time by this object, and so my aunt is upstairs, my mom is downstairs, and then at some point in time, and I asked both of them separately if they could remember if one of them went upstairs or the other one went downstairs or how they both knew that they were looking at it. Neither could remember exactly how they came to be standing next to each other watching this object. And from that point as well, the recollections deviated. My mom remembered watching as mist obscured this object and they could no longer see it, whereas my aunt remembered continuously watching it and while it was still in full view, deciding simply to go to bed. Now, another account which I remember hearing all throughout my childhood, which I didn't connect to this particular event until many years later, was that a year after this occurrence, of seeing the moon-like object outside their house, my aunt had moved out into an apartment, and she awoke in the middle of the night to find my mom, who would then have been 13, in her room. So she asked what the heck she was doing there, went to turn the light on, and as soon as she turned the light on, my mom vanished. So again, you could say that this is simply hypnagogia. This is some sort of, dream experience. I'm not even saying that it isn't. The odd thing about it is that she could correctly identify exactly what my mom had worn to bed that night. And what's even weirder than this is that my mom said when she was a kid, she was very OCD about what she wore to bed. She would wear the same thing every night and she would always put her hair up into braids. However, this particular night, she had just fallen asleep in her blouse and left her hair out. And when my aunt told her about it the next day, without seeing what she had been wearing, without knowing that she had worn her hair differently and worn a different outfit to bed, she explained exactly how my mom's hair looked and what she was wearing down to a T. Now, in addition to this, and again, there are other stories I could tell about the house and all of the things that happened there, but something that I find connected to this particular instance is the fact that my aunt claimed that after that initial experience of seeing the light with my mom, she began having what she called flying dreams, where she would go to sleep and have a dream that she looked down and saw her body lying in bed while her consciousness was kind of like flying overhead, as well as dreams of being led by balls of light. Now, this case, as well as being truly, in my opinion, quite a fascinating, you know, sort of bunch of experiences, I guess I would say, which appear to be triggered by one central experience. Aside from it being that, it's also a great example of how our mindsets and belief systems can really influence how we handle information. And, the example of this is that when I first heard about this case, I was a kid. And so at that time, I was really interested in cryptozoology, getting really interested in ghosts and hauntings, spectrology. And so this was just one of those things that had happened in the ghost house. And so, I didn't really look at it as anything beyond that. And effectively, especially as a kid, I thought of these experiences as, well, they happened in the haunted house or they happened when people were living in the haunted house. And so then you move away from the haunted house and it's done. Now, years later, when I became very interested in ufology, especially, the initial kind of popularized little green men, nuts and bolts, spaceships ufology, I was absolutely convinced that this was some sort of abduction phenomenon. Because we have this sighting where they're in two separate rooms and then they see this thing and then suddenly they're together. I'm like, okay, they were each separately picked up by the spaceship and then they were dropped off together. And it was like one of those little slight mistakes, like, people waking up with their clothes inside out. And then, a year later, when my mom magically showed up in my aunt's room, my aunt wasn't actually remembering some experience that actually happened in her room. She was remembering being on board the same, mothership where they both were retaken. And, part of this had to do with the fact that it was, around the time I first read Missing Time by Bud Hopkins. And I was immediately struck by how many cases very similar to this regarding these egg or orb like lights, of course, mainly referred to as crafts at the time, seen by people who had these recurring experiences. And I will say, for the record, I've definitely moved on from especially UFO stuff, but even, any other branch of the paranormal being a purely physical experience, and um I do think that too. I have to put down that this doesn't diminish the importance of these experiences at all. If it doesn't really have an effect on that, it's just that I do believe that they're occurring on, for lack of a better term, perhaps a spiritual level, something that's psychological yet tied to the greater human psychology of the collective unconscious. So, with all of that being said, one of the things about this case that stands out to me first and foremost is yet again the fact that light is kind of the determining factor in this entire, story, in this account. Their attention is both attracted from whatever they're doing by this light that they see. And yet again, it's this specifically orb or ball of light. I mentioned a while ago the prevalence of egg-shaped objects. There is something, I think, archetypal about the symbol of something circular, something egg-shaped, in these encounters. That again reveals that it's not simply, seeing something objective, it's seeing something that has a connection to the symbolism of what exactly it means to be human. Now, another thing that occurs in this case, which I've noticed in many other cases, is that, at least in my mom's recollection, mist was involved. And it's this mist that moved in and kind of obscured the object. Now, we see this again in every single different type of paranormal phenomena, whether we're talking about UFOs, as in this case would technically be, UFO. Well, I'm making the effort to start saying UFO as a side note because of the UAP bandwagon, which again, I believe UAP is a, unexplainable aerial phenomenon is a much better term than unidentified flying object. However, I still love how kitschy UFO is, and so I'm really going to be trying moving forward. I know this is a complete tangent to say UFO and just push the envelope of kitschiness even further because I think that they deserve that concept of the UFO is of such a time and with such a strong, you know, kind of emphasis behind it that it's become its own thing. It's hardly an acronym anymore. It is this name for something that people experience. So I'm going to start calling them UFOs. So if you hear me saying that in the future, yes, I'm aware it's supposed to be UFO and technically it's supposed to be UAP. But I'm following the footsteps of John Keel, who also called them UFOs. So anyway, as I was saying, mists, prevalent in every type of paranormal phenomena, such as in this, which would technically be a UFO case. Of course, we have ghosts and hauntings, misty figures, or even just bizarre mists that appear, whether to the naked eye or in some photography. Again, I'm always a little skeptical of photographs of haunted locations. However, I do believe that there is, a certain class of photographs that genuinely capture some sort of energetic phenomenon that manifests as a mist. And then, of course, there are even some cryptid encounters, Bigfoot encounters, where the beast seems to kind of be enveloped in mist instead of actually leaving, or even creatures that are partly made out of mist. There's this fantastic case I want to get to that involves a Sasquatch-like creature who doesn't really have legs, but they're rather surrounded by this mist as well as orbs of light. So again, mists are one of those things which just, for whatever reason, seem to be prevalent in any type of unexplainable phenomenon. Now, the further question I have about that is that my aunt didn't remember any sort of mist obscuring the object. She simply remembered that they decided right then and there to go to bed. Now, this experience was the catalyst for further experiences for her, not least of which the effectively out of body experiential dreams, which she had, as well as recurring dreams of being led by, yet again, orbs of light. Now, yes, I'm tying in dreams to the phenomenon because I do believe that, there is something on that level. There's something in the world of dreams, that kind of subliminal area. And again, too, I'm a huge fan of Carl Jung's work and how he involved the collective unconscious as something powerful, as something important, and not just, dreams aren't just these flippant experiences. I mean, yes, sometimes they are. But underneath that, you can find these patterns throughout people's, experiences that really it makes sense. And so in my mind, my aunt had this event that really kind of changed her perception on things. And, again, my mom was very comfortable talking about this. My entire childhood, my aunt would kind of just, oh yeah, yeah, I remember that, kind of brush it off. And it took me being probably very annoying and incessant and super into UFOs to be like, tell me about it. I want to know about it. And here's some other stuff that I've learned. And finally, she gave me this account. And in that, she also revealed that, because my mom wants to try and figure out what it was. Again, at the time, I was very interested in the concept of regression hypnosis to recall memory. And my mom was all on board. She wanted to find a place that would do that. And when I asked my aunt about it, she was like, I don't really want to know if there was anything else. So this had a profound effect on her and a profoundly different effect on her than my mom. And again, then she had the further experiences of, these bizarre dreams. She had my mom showing up in her apartment. Um, and my question there, I guess, is my mom remembers this mist obscuring the object. My aunt doesn't remember that. She remembers seeing the object until they decided to go to bed. Was the mist some sort of almost psychological screen put up by my mom over whatever this was? Again, it's fantastic because we have this case where the two people have very different recollections. Now, on the flip side, my aunt's recollection of both deciding to just go to bed after seeing, like, while seeing this thing, while still seeing this object, is incredibly bizarre in and of itself. And this is a very strong kind of strain that you'll see throughout different paranormal encounters, where people are witnessing an anomaly and they behave in a way that is almost ridiculously rational, as though nothing is out of the ordinary, where they just decide, like, okay, yes, there's something going on. I'm seeing this going on. I don't know what it is. Let's stop looking at it. And here, I mean, this is just a classic example where you have two people both separately observing a strange phenomenon, then both witnessing it together, agreeing, yes, we're seeing this thing that we can't explain. Let's go to bed. On top of that, too, is the following occurrence of my aunt somehow seeing my mom and being properly able to identify exactly what she was wearing. Now, the really odd thing about this is exactly that. She was able to say, I mean, it's almost like remote viewing of some sort, or perhaps astral projection. And I know these, like, even in the realms of the paranormal, these probably seem like kind of out there things to mention. Um, how do you explain that though? How do you explain that she was capable of saying, hey, I had this weird, effectively vision of you last night. This is what you were wearing. This was what your hair looked like, and it is 100% accurate. Beyond that, the weird thing to me is how very much this kind of vision of my mom, for lack of a better word, behaved like a paranormal phenomenon. What I mean by that is, if you just remove the fact that it was my mom, my aunt's sister, you have someone waking up in the middle of the night, seeing a figure in their room, they turn the light on, and it vanishes. Yet again, we have light as an enacting factor on a bizarre occurrence. And the only thing that makes us any different is that, hey, she knew her. It was her sister. And again, she was able to identify what she had been wearing. Now, the fact, again, that this happened between two people who were involved in the same sighting of a bizarre light, to me, just really kind of pins down the concept that these things, you know, as much as they do, they're somehow capable of imprinting themselves objectively. They're capable of appearing as something which multiple people can see. So it's not purely subjective. The real importance is the effect that these occurrences have on a human life. So, yes, that is this particular case of the Ghost House UFO. But before I leave for today, I just really wanted to say that, you know, the world is a very uncertain place. I mean, I think that that's an understatement. Definitely, Captain Obvious here, I suppose. And it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense a lot of the time. And so I just, talking about these sort of things, which, yeah, a lot of people think that this is just a bunch of flippant, silly nonsense. Why would you waste your time on it? But to me, there's something important about really looking into these things that people believe in, that happen to people, that cause an effect on people, and that we really don't understand. This field is finally an admission that the human mind, we don't have all the answers. We don't even have all the questions. And so I just really wanted to say yet again, thank you so much for kind of tuning in and looking into this mystery with me. So if you enjoyed this episode on the Ghost House UFO, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. And for today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.